Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. Today's webinar is Connecting Community Assets with Market Demand for Lasting Livelihoods. Our speaker today is Melissa Levy. She's a Senior Associate at the Yellowwood Associates. I am Jessica Hemans. I'm the Training Coordinator here at the National Consumer Law Center, and today is June 20th, 2013. This webinar is provided by the National Consumer Law Center, WealthWorks, the National Alliance for Rural Policy, and Yellowwood Associates. So please enter your audio PIN if you have not done so. If you're listening on the phone, it helps to enter the pound sign, the number, and the pound. The PIN is unique to you, and you need to enter that into your phone keypad. If you're listening over the computer, you do not need to worry about a PIN, but please be sure your device volume settings are properly adjusted. If they're not working correctly, try unplugging and replugging them in. Everybody is muted during the presentation, and I'm recording it. Questions, if you have a question about what Melissa is talking about today, you can type those in and I will relay it to her at the very end. If you're having any technical problems, you can also type that in and I will assist you. There is an evaluation. It will pop up on your screen at the very end. So just exit out and it'll pop up. Please do that for us. And tomorrow I'll email you with a link to our website where you can download the PowerPoint and the recording. So again, if you have any questions, just type those in. And if you want to minimize your control panel, click on the orange arrow. So our presenter today is Melissa Levy. She's a Senior Associate, and she has been with Yellowwood Associates since May 2003. Yellowwood is the managing grantee of the Ford Foundation's Wealth Creation in Rural Communities Initiative. As part of that work, Melissa currently coaches grantees on wealth creation and measurement. So hi, Melissa. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks, Jessica. I am okay. Let's see. Okay, great. Well, thanks, Jessica. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to speak with you all today. And I'm going to show you, this presentation is going to be in 4 parts. I'm going to talk about this WealthWorks initiative. We're going to talk about defining wealth, WealthWorks value chains, and then some components of the practice on the ground. Again, my name is Melissa Levy. I'm a Senior Associate at Yellowwood Associates. We've been working for the past 4 or 5 years, maybe longer, with the Ford Foundation on their Wealth Creation and Rural Communities Initiative, which is now being called WealthWorks. And anyway, we've been working with grantees on the ground in 3 regions, which I'll tell you about shortly. And I wanted to just give you that context. So introduction to WealthWorks. What is it? We feel like WealthWorks is a bridge between community development and economic development. As you're aware of, community development is really about voice and power and uses organizing strategies to achieve those kinds of outcomes, and it tends to be based around particular issues. Whereas economic development conventionally is about creating jobs and income by attracting businesses through different kinds of tax breaks and incentives, and encouraging entrepreneurs and strengthening existing on-the-ground businesses. So the limitations of either of those approaches is that neither one really takes a systems approach to development of communities and economies. Neither one really addresses the economic exploitation faced in high poverty areas, and they don't really offer an alternative approach to market connections. And neither one really explicitly connects economic, social, and environmental opportunities. So as a result, WealthWorks came out of the Wealth Creation and Rural Communities Initiative. And the mission is really to improve the livelihoods of low-wealth people and communities by creating wealth through market interactions. And that wealth is owned, controlled, and reinvested in the places in which this is happening. So again, we feel like this is about economic development that connects community assets, mostly significantly underutilized assets, people, place, property, and know-how, and connects those assets to market demand to create lasting livelihoods. It's really about weaving the self-interest of people, places, firms, and organizations in a region for mutual benefit. It's about building regional prosperity and self-reliance. And we're really trying to link what local people and businesses can do to higher return demand beyond their communities in larger regions. We feel like this initiative increases upward mobility and creates wealth that sticks in rural places. And then we also think that this builds partnerships of stakeholders that can then flex for different kinds of initiatives and different kinds of issues. Let's see. I got stuck for a second.
Melissa, if it's being sticky, toggle between your mouse and the arrow keys on your keyboard. That sometimes helps.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. There we go. So where are we working on the ground? We have grantees in 3 regions. These were chosen by the Ford Foundation. Central Appalachia, so the states of West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And then the Alabama Black Belt and the Mid-South Delta region, so Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama. And then the lower Rio Grande Valley region in Texas along the Mexico border. And these are some of the value chains that are being constructed in those regions, including energy efficiency, green housing, food, agriculture, forestry, tourism, and you can see. Okay, so why should you guys care about this approach? We feel like it really expands your economic development toolkit, building on things that you're already doing. It brings underutilized assets into productive use, maximizes local wealth retention and creation, minimizes the negative impacts that we see from development that jeopardize the future of rural communities, and really helps low-income people, places, and businesses get ahead, and therefore build a region's resiliency and self-reliance. So these are some of the guiding principles of this approach, and I'll go through it real quick. But basically, we feel like this wealth creation through the WealthWorks approach is demand-driven. It's really about not saying what you can produce, but really asking what the market wants and trying to be responsive to that. It's intentionally inclusive of low wealth and low-income communities and people. It's tied to place, as you can see by the areas that we're working in. They're very tied to place by those particular WealthWorks value chains. And measurement is integrated into the entire process, and it's really used as a tool for planning and management and evaluation, but it provides a way to plan the activities of those value chains. Number 5, wealth sticks in places through attention to structures of ownership and control. Again, we're really trying to make sure that wealth sticks. So we're talking about different kinds of structures of ownership and control, like cooperatives and community investment and things like that. And then this approach is very flexible while doing no harm. That's the most important thing, that we're doing no harm to these communities. But there are any number of ways of getting there. So I wanted to talk through how we define wealth in this approach. So what is wealth? Wealth is not just money. I know that you guys know that. In this approach, well, we consider wealth the stock of all assets that can contribute to the well-being of people, places, or economies. And that's not just financial. So we define it broadly as the stock of all assets that can contribute to the well-being of an individual or group. And then, as a stock of assets, it's durable and can be accumulated or depleted through investment and consumption decisions. And then these stocks generate flows. We typically consider income wealth, but income is just a flow of money into a stock of wealth. So not all of these flows can be monetized. So there are any number of different numbers of wealth and capital that different approaches use. The triple bottom line has 3. There's one that has 5. This one actually has 8. The 7 here are the ones that we actually measure. Intellectual capital is the stock of knowledge and creativity in a region. Individual capital is the stock of individual skills and health of people. Social capital, you guys are all aware of, is the stock of trust and relationships and networks. Natural capital is about unimpaired natural assets. Built capital is what it sounds like, physical infrastructure and information infrastructure. Political capital is the stock of voice and power. And financial capital in this approach is unencumbered monetary assets, so not debt, but unencumbered monetary assets that can then be reinvested in some of these other forms of capital. And this approach is really trying to create impacts on all of these at the same time. There's also cultural capital, which is the eighth one, and in this framework, we feel that cultural capital is built or preserved investments in the other 7 forms of capital. So for instance, we're working in Alabama where in Gee's Bend, Alabama, famous Gee's Bend quilters, that quilting is a cultural tradition in that area. And the folks that we're working with in that area are really trying to maintain and increase that particular cultural capital by building those skills in the younger generation. But we do not measure cultural capital. That's something that we feel is measured through the others. So wealth and livelihoods, this is the main point of this initiative. And you know, livelihood, just like it sounds, is really being able to overcome vulnerability, rebound from our emergencies, and just be able to maintain, you know, your standard of living. So you can't really achieve livelihood and sustain it with financial capital alone. There are any number of examples I could use, but I can think of, you know, when a family has an emergency, then neighbors and friends and family come to help. That's not financial capital. That is social capital. That's trust and networks and connections with people. And there are any number of examples for the others, but you have to have, in our experience, you really need to have a stock of all of those capitals to actually produce something. And we feel like working to increase all of those forms of capital creates a situation where regions and communities, companies and families can have better livelihood outcomes over time. So in terms of just the takeaways about wealth, again, we feel like investments in multiple forms of capital are required to create sustainable wealth. The capitals critical to a particular place are really best understood by that place and by the people in that place. Good economic development strategies strive to increase the stock of as many capitals as possible while decreasing none. And we've seen that with our grantees on the ground, that they're really either increasing or maintaining their stocks of those different forms of capital. They would tell you that for each initiative, there are certain forms of capital that are more important than others. And I can talk more about that too. But livelihoods are really at the heart of what we want to improve. So we really want to focus on building wealth that sticks, and that requires thinking about local ownership and control and investment. Okay, so WealthWorks value chains. This initiative is really built around value chains. So what is a value chain? So a WealthWorks value chain is a business model based on shared economic, social, and environmental values in which buyers, processors, producers, and others work together for mutual benefit to create value in response to market demand while building community wealth. So essentially, it's sort of like a supply chain, except all of the participants in a WealthWorks value chain are connecting for mutual benefit. They're all trying to get a piece of the action, but they recognize that others need to get their piece as well. And it's really being responsive to market demand. These are just a quick summary of kind of how a WealthWorks value chain is different from a traditional supply chain. I think the biggest one is really that demand part. Rather than saying, what do I have to offer the market, it's what does the market really want that I can be responsive to. And then, the measurement is a little bit different. The supply chain is measured by net income produced. The WealthWorks value chain is really about wealth created and retained in a region. And in the WealthWorks value chain, there's a sense of everyone being in it together instead of the typical supply chain role of everyone being in it for him or herself. And then there are other differences you can see around how policy is dealt with and costs and benefits. And again, the mutual benefit is again a huge part of this. So this is an example. This is the Central Appalachian Network, which is one of our grantees in Central Appalachia. It's a network of 6 organizations. Right now they're really focused on sustainable agriculture and regional and local food chains. And so this is kind of a generic value chain map that they put together. But you can see in the center are kind of the people you would think about in a typical food chain. There's the producers, processors, the aggregators and distributors, wholesale buyers, direct sales, consumers, and then there's input suppliers and waste. Those are kind of the core functions. That's what has to happen for this to work in the blue and the purple. And then the green along the outside is really the support functions that are really useful, but probably but a little more peripheral to the actual provision of food. So we've got trainers, extension folks, researchers, certifiers, brokers, landowners, financing, national organizations, other regional value chains, government, media, economic development, and marketing. And those are what we would consider support functions. And then in the orange is the value chain intermediary or coordinator. And all of the value chains that we've been working through really have a coordinating organization that holds all of the pieces of that chain together. And they're having conversations with all of these players, but probably most significantly with the folks in the middle, these blue and purple ones that are really the core. And those coordinators are really necessary for this to work, because this is not easy work, but it seems so far to be very rewarding. There are some really amazing outcomes, and I just wanted to share that chain map. They all look different. I have to say all the value chain maps that our grantees have put together all look very different, and it's just based on how they think about their chain. Okay, so what's different about this WealthWorks value chain? Again, it begins with demand, and we're really trying, these chains are really trying to be responsive to demand at 2 levels. One is demand for the actual product or service that's being sold. The other is for the secondary benefits created, such as some of the different forms of wealth, like skills that are being developed for local people, or improving natural resources, or building some new physical infrastructure. It really builds relationships. There's managed by a coordinator. Information, self-interest, and opportunities for mutual benefit are openly shared. Our coordinators really, when they're trying to build those relationships, are trying to figure out how they can have a relationship with another player where both sides win. When we have these conversations, a lot of times the question is, what's in it for me? And so those partners engage in a way that is based on their own self-interest. And that means that they value that kind of relationship, and more so than when you're asking for money or you're asking for a donation. They're really being useful based on their strengths, and they're getting something out of it. These value chains are really focused on building wealth, and that focus drives how the chain gets built, who benefits, and how those impacts are measured. And it creates sustainable capacity. We feel like there's some fundamental forms of capital that are critical to get things off the ground. Social, definitely without relationships and networks, it's impossible to get this work done. Intellectual, without really amazing ideas and imagination and creativity, these things won't happen either. Political capital, I mean, definitely having the voice and power to get these ideas to move them is critical. And I would also say individual capital. Without the skills to actually make these things happen, it's not going to happen. And so those forms of capital are really foundational in this work. And once you've developed them for one value chain, they can be applied to other sectors over time. So I want to just talk a little bit about some of the components of this practice on the ground, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I was hoping to ask some questions of you guys too. So we feel like there's a flow to this. So the flow is really about figuring out what kinds of underutilized assets you have, and then identifying a sector that you might be able to break into and a product or a service that you can provide. Then it's really, to get at the market demand point, you really want to think about market potential and anchor demand. And then in terms of the livelihood, we're really trying, the final step is really constructing that value chain and making wealth stick. So in terms of figuring out what kinds of sectors you want to work through, it's really important, again, to think about the underutilized resources that you have and what kinds of contributions they can make to demand. So a lot of regions start with sectors that they already know are kind of happening in the region or could be viable in the region. And we're trying to find sectors that have the potential to grow and to provide jobs for people already in the region. And also sectors which offer opportunities to generate locally owned and controlled resources. And then, of course, with any endeavor, you want to think about the energy and excitement people have about growing a particular sector. And then the demand side. You have to understand what people want. So who are the demand side partners? Who are the organizations or people or institutions that are going to be demanding what you have to provide? So you want to ask what people or organizations actually want. You want to understand value propositions. Again, that's the what's in it for me. So understand what's in it for those other potential partners. We want to look for early adopter anchor customers, like large customers who can help you get up and running. We have a great example of that. There's a value chain being built in the Arkansas Delta around biofuel. They're growing a crop called camelina, which can be grown in the winter by farmers who don't have a winter crop. And their anchor customer, they had early interest from FedEx and from Valero because it's my understanding that to touch down an airplane in Europe from here, you need to have biofuel, a certain amount of biofuel. So those companies were the early adopter anchor customers for that particular value chain, and that provided the impetus to get things moving and to get people excited. In terms of framing inclusive business, it's really about how to involve low-income and low-wealth people in the initiative. And it's really about reciprocation. It's about building relationships that are reciprocal. That's a huge part of this, where both sides get something out of it. And developing agreements that make wealth stick. And then presenting investment opportunities that community investors and others might be interested in. And then here, this is, in actually constructing these value chains, there's a lot that goes into it. This, as part of the Ford Foundation initiative, we really provide a great deal of technical assistance, both around process, but also around content areas. Different grantees are thinking about different trainings and certifications to build individual capital. There's a lot of going on around product development and marketing. Some of these initiatives are building brands. We have a grantee in Appalachian, Ohio called Rural Action that is focused on building a sustainable forestry and wood products value chain, and they've actually launched a new brand now to sell regionally produced certified wood and making connections to demand in urban areas, and that brand is called Woodright. A lot of our grantees are doing training and we're learning a lot about building different forms of wealth. We're assisting folks in identifying partners and making introductions. And we're really trying to measure baseline conditions and develop information systems that add value. This initiative really focuses on measurement as a way of planning your interventions. All of the grantees need to take baseline measures of each of the forms of wealth, their impacts around those forms of wealth, and then they need to remeasure them every year. And through that process, they've been able to see what kinds of impact they're having and if the actions they're taking are actually getting them where they need to go. So it's actually, and where they're not having that impact, they then need to change them. And so this process of measurement really helps them to plan and kind of modify their actions when needed to have greater impact. And then there's this component of making wealth stick, and that's another big part of this. So we've been really looking at different kinds of structures for ownership and control of wealth, like cooperatives, community land trusts, community benefit agreements, municipal land trusts, and different kinds of contracts. We have our grantees are working with Wake Forest. There's a legal clinic at Wake Forest University where they're getting help on their legal issues in terms of these kinds of structures for ownership and control. There's quite a bit of work being done at MIT for some of our grantees around some of these issues as well. And yeah, so I think we'll know more soon about some of these structures, some of the more innovative structures for ownership and control. And as I said before, there's really, in terms of being inclusive, we really want to make sure that low-income and low-wealth people are really involved in these value chains. And so here are some of the roles that we've seen so far for those folks in terms of being producers and entrepreneurs, adding value to a good or service, employees of businesses that are actually engaged in these value chains, consumers of better quality products, and as co-producers able to really access the goods or services that increase their productivity and or reduce or avoid costs. And there's some really, I can give you some examples. In Central Appalachia, the Central Appalachian Network, which I mentioned already, is really working with, small farmers and small producers and really connecting them to larger markets, aggregating them and connecting them to larger wholesale markets that they wouldn't be a part of without being a part of that value chain. We're working with MESA, the Mountain Association for Community and Economic Development in Appalachian, Kentucky. They are building a value chain around energy efficiency. And what they've really done is created a way, this is coal country, so you can imagine this is pretty exciting. In coal country, they have created a value chain that allows low-income folks to have energy efficiency retrofits, and they don't have to pay the upfront cost. The savings on the bills is what pays for the retrofit. So where once low-income folks in those areas were not able to get energy efficiency retrofits because they weren't able to pay for them, now through this initiative they're able to have those retrofits not pay for them. The retrofits are paid by the savings on the bill. It's called all on-bill financing. And the energy utilities are really excited because they don't have to build a new coal power plant. So they are actually a big fan of this program. So there are a lot of different ways that low-income people are involved in these value chains. I gave you an example of one where they're a producer and one where they're a consumer. So we really feel like this approach produces and sustains real results. It brings underutilized community assets into participation and production. It creates wealth that's owned, controlled, and reinvested locally. It increases the upward mobility of low-income people while building a more self-reliant regional economy. And it forges valued partnerships within a network of people and resources so that they can really more ably and flexibly connect again and again to really continue to do this work in different sectors and with different programs and different potential partners. Yeah, so before we get to this part, I wanted to see if anyone has any questions I can answer.
Hi, Melissa. Right now we don't have any, but just to remind folks that you can type them in, and I'll relay it to you.
Yeah, sure. In terms of kind of what we're experiencing, like I said, we have like, I don't know, 10 or 12 different grantees on the ground in those 3 regions, and I have to say they're seeing amazing. There is amazing impact. We're actually at this moment really trying to put some of those big picture outcomes and impacts into a document to share with outside folks, because it's, you know, I can tell stories all day long, but it's hard to find them all in one place. The measurement reporting that these grantees are doing is really great because we can see from year to year, we can see progress along all of these different forms of wealth. We have another, I'm trying to think what other examples I can use. We have a group in Alabama doing sustainable forestry and wood products production. And again, with that anchor customer piece, they were able to connect with big paper company. Of course, it's escaping my memory right now, where they were able to aggregate minority landowners into landowner associations that could actually aggregate product to sell to this big paper company. And that's been really successful. And so I think that's happened in a lot of our groups, where they're really aggregating supply so that they can serve larger markets. Yes. And they're having some really great policy impacts, too. We have a group in Appalachian, Kentucky that works throughout the Central Appalachian region, and their goal was really to develop green, affordable housing. But what they found was that there wasn't a lot of, the different areas of their region couldn't agree about what green meant. And so there's been some learning about that and defining terms and creating a shared language across the region. And then the other thing that they found through mapping out their value chain was that there was really a lack of appraisers that could appraise energy efficient homes with added value, because that energy efficiency really does provide added value. And so they were able to get a whole bunch of different agencies and policy people together to really start thinking about how to get past that. And now they're actually going to be creating an energy efficient mortgage product that will help with that appraisal issue. So those are just some examples. I know it's hard to imagine. We have a ton of reports that you'll see at the end. I have some links that you're more than welcome to go check out. But I really was hoping to learn about strengths. An exercise that I do when we do these presentations in person is we get people to think about kind of where their strengths are in terms of creating or impacting different forms of wealth. So I know it's not easy in this kind of a setting because you guys can't all talk to me. But I would love to hear, if you guys have any thoughts. We can start with these first 3. If you guys have any, if anyone really feels, for instance, I'm going to just say that personally I feel like I have some strength in terms of individual capital, in terms of training, providing skills to people around this approach. And so, I would love to hear from anybody who feels like they can talk about how they impact some of these different forms of wealth. And I have all of them here. You can see all 7. But I'd love to hear if anybody had anything to share in terms of how they're building on these different stocks of wealth in their communities or through their organizations or programs.
Thanks, Melissa. We actually, a couple things have come in.
Okay.
Yeah, so Karen says, how can groups outside of your partners' grantees can take advantage of these methods?
That's a great question. There's actually a toolkit being developed right now. It's being developed by the Aspen Institute, who's one of our partners in this initiative. And so there will be a whole kit full of tools to implement this approach. And those tools are really, they're really being created to be used by those value chain coordinators, those coordinating organizations that are really holding the value chain. So that's one way. We have a ton of materials on our website with different reports and some tools. And also, we're going to be, right now we're developing a coaches training. We at Yellowwood are developing a coaches training because right now I coach, myself and 2 or 3 other people coach all of our grantees on how to work through this approach. And so we're trying to train some more coaches because we think that this approach is going to gain some momentum, and it would be helpful to have people to be able to help coach those coordinators through it. So we're developing that training right now, and that will start to be provided later this year. But I'm more than happy to share any of the tools that I have. We have a wealth matrix that really helps you to measure your impact on different forms of wealth, and we have a lot of tools that we use in spreading this approach to different groups. So I'm more than happy to share those, but I think there'll be a whole new set available in the next few months.
Great. And also, how long do you find going through this process typically takes?
Yeah, well, so we've, at least with our grantees, we've kind of divided this into sections. So we've had our grantees in the South start by doing an exploration. And that exploration, I think we've given them about a year to really explore what kind of sector they want to pursue and start to make the connections with potential partners. And that really takes time. I think our grantees in Central Appalachia did not have that kind of opportunity. They kind of jumped right in. But I think it probably took them about 6 months to a year to really explore, to fine-tune the kind of value chain they wanted to create and to start building those partnerships that were really necessary to make it happen. I have to say our Central Appalachian grantees have been at this the longest. They have had four years of funding, and they have some amazing results to share. And I've shared some of them with you, but there's some real quantitative and qualitative impacts and outcomes from this. So I think our Southern grantees, they've been at this for almost 2 years. They're getting there. I think it takes time. I think developing relationships can take a lot of time, and that is something that's really critical to this approach. But again, like I said in the presentation, once you build those relationships, you can build on them for other kinds of sectors or initiatives. But I think it depends on the capacity of the organization too. Our grantees in Central Appalachia were like very long-term organizations that had been around for 20 or 30 years. So they really had the capacity to manage projects like this, whereas some of our grantees in the South are pretty small, a little bit lower capacity, more of like startups, and it's taking them a little bit longer. So I think it really depends on kind of your organization and just the time it takes to do this and the partnerships that you already have.
Thanks. And when will people find out about the coaches training, when it's available?
Oh, where or when?
When?
Oh, okay. Yep. Well,
or I guess how will people find out?
Yeah, how is probably the question. That's a good question. We're going to be doing kind of an introductory webinar to what that training will look like, probably sometime later this summer. I think probably the best, I'm trying to think of the best way. There's, at the end of my presentation, which I'll show you, I'll just move forward, is this, the National Community of Practice is, it's an amazing place. It has tons of webinars with great information, and my sense is it will be posted there. That webinar about the coaches training will probably be organized through that mechanism, and I think information about the coaches training would be available on that as well. And you can always get in touch with me. I'm kind of playing a large role in developing that, and yeah, it should be. I would say probably August we'll do that introductory webinar, and you can find it. That Community of Practice is great. It has a lot of great publications, great webinars, resources, and there's always like amazing conversations going on there about some of these issues and people actually implementing it and asking interesting questions. So it's a really great thing to join. And then these other websites, so Creating a Real Wealth is the website that was tied to the Ford Foundation initiative. It hasn't really changed a lot. Our site, the Livelihoods site, Wealth Creation, has all of the archival reports and documents that have been developed through building this initiative. And so that has, it also has the interim kind of annual reports from the initiative, so you can kind of see some of the progress. It just has a lot on it. That's where we keep all the archives. And yeah, I hope that helps.
Great. So Kathleen has a question. There are a couple questions within it.
Okay.
The
sure.
first part is, do these efforts appear they will be sustainable beyond grant funding they presently have?
That's a really good
So
question.
that's part one, and then part two would be,
Yeah.
and are lower cost goods and services being developed? And then part three is, how long has the longest running value chain project been going on? So
Okay.
part A was the
Wow.
one about the grant funding they have.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, you know, my understanding is right now is that the Ford Foundation is in it right now, and actually they may not be in it for the long haul. That is still to be determined, and we're trying to make efforts outside of the Ford Foundation to keep this going. I think it's pretty hard. I mean, the longest running grants so far, like I said, are in Central Appalachia. They have been going for the past 4 years. And they will be getting another couple of years of funding. I think, you know, my sense so far is that these projects really need some sort of subsidy for like, you know, longer, for probably 5 to 8, 10 years to get them moving. And I think, you know, we're thinking about this in a track where they're getting this significant funding at the beginning, and I think we'll eventually get kind of weaned off, because these initiatives are really meant to be sustainable at some point in terms of they're actually selling a good or service that will help support that value chain coordinator organization and keep that value chain going. And it's hard for me to say because that hasn't happened yet. Those folks still have Ford funding, and they're leveraging other kinds of funding as well. But, you know, part of it is about investment. Some of these value chain partners are actually investing in those value chains. So there are different mechanisms for bringing resources into these initiatives. It's not just the Ford Foundation. It's other foundations. It's corporations. It's potentially local governments and state governments that see the value. They see their value proposition in being a part of it. It's a really good question, though, and I wish I had a really good answer. I think, you know, I think the sense is they will be sustainable, but they aren't yet. And in terms of how long, like I said, it's been about 4 years for the longest running ones. The southern ones have been at it for about 2 years. And our Texas, we have a grantee in Texas who's been at it for about a year or two. And they're, you know, they're still at the beginning of this. It really takes a significant amount of time to build the relationships necessary to make this happen. But I think you're really building kind of a foundation for this kind of work moving forward. And then in terms of lower cost goods and services, I think I'm not exactly sure. I think a lot of these initiatives are trying to build demand outside of their regions and kind of more urban areas. This initiative has really been about connecting rural areas to larger areas of demand, like urban areas and larger regions. And so they're not all producing lower cost goods and services. Some are producing, like I'd say with the sustainable wood examples, they're probably comparable to other wood products. And I think there's an added value because they're produced in the Appalachian region, and that's what they're building on in terms of marketing. But I'm not, some of the, probably some of the food products could be considered lower cost. I'm not entirely sure of that either. I mean, my sense is that, a lot of the food producers that are working in the food value chain are really producing organic and pesticide-free products, which typically have a bit of have a little bit more and might cost a little bit more in terms of price. But I think this initiative and this approach could really be used to think about lower cost goods and services. I'm not sure that that's really been focused on with the ones that we're working with right now. Well, certainly the energy efficiency one, I mean, they're not paying anything. These low-income folks are getting energy efficiency retrofits for no cost. So there's a good example.
Great. So just to remind everybody, everybody on this webinar will receive a copy of the PowerPoint and the recording. We'll have that posted tomorrow. But Madison wanted to know, are the 7 forms of capital, do you have that typed up somewhere, like maybe in a Word doc or a PDF?
I do, yeah. I could definitely share the 7. Yeah, we have some great resources, 7 forms of wealth. Is that something I can share with you, Jessica, and you can send me?
Why don't you email me the link, and then I'll pass that on to everybody tomorrow.
Okay, I'm not sure there's a link, but I can send you a file.
Perfect.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And they have, they're very extensive definitions and talk about different investments. And, yeah, I apologize. That wasn't in the presentation. I mean, it was, but not in a longer format.
So Connie just wanted to share some other resources, and one we will talk about in just a little bit, but that was the Rural Exchange /net for the Community Change Resource Bank that can be accessed. She says there's a lot of great resources there. And she also wanted to share that, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but she participated on the design team, which improves the process. It's called Strategic Doing, and it's a concept that Ed Morrison of Purdue has been instrumental in developing. So thank you, Connie, for that.
That sounds really interesting. Great.
So that's all.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just going to say that National Community of Practice has a lot of links to interesting places and interesting documents and things like that. And yeah, sorry.
Great. Well, we are all done with questions and comments. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I just want to thank everyone for listening. And again, if you have any questions after this or want to learn more, I'm more than happy to chat pretty much any time. And we have, I guess I did want to say that we have started to use this approach in other ways. We worked with the National Cooperative Business Association to really try to get a handle on the different impacts that cooperatives are having on these different forms of wealth. And that was a really rewarding project. And we've worked with the National Association of Development Organizations to work with regional development groups around the country to kind of spread the word about this as well. So there are other kind of avenues we're taking to get the word out and to spread it to a larger audience. So, but yeah, thanks again for letting me talk about it, and the questions were great, and thanks.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm really glad you mentioned cooperatives. That's what I studied in grad school. So, great.
Great.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And just to remind people, this is what we just talked about, the ruralexchange.net site, and they also have a Facebook page. You can go there. We'll post updates and follow-up discussions related to this webinar there. We will continue this series of our Rural Initiative webinars. We will probably have one in July and August. As soon as I get the information for that, I will send it to you. Please do the evaluation for us. You just need to exit out of the webinar. Click on that exit button. It'll pop up on your computer. Just takes a second to fill out for us. And tomorrow I'll email you where you can link up to our PowerPoint and recording. And thanks so much to our audience. And thank you very much to Melissa for your great presentation today.